Today we're going to make a fresh pizza, and we're going to be making it with bread that we're going to be making from scratch. So first thing you need is your flour in the bowl, and we're using bread flour or strong flour. This is because of the gluten level. The more gluten it has, the more it can stretch. When I knead later on, you'll see how stretchy it gets, and that's the gluten working in it. So we've got our flour, and we need to get our yeast dissolved. We're using a quick dry yeast today. We're not going to use fresh because it's a lot easier. And we've got tepid water. Tepid water means when you put your finger in it, it feels slightly warm, and no warmer than that, because it will kill the yeast. The yeast needs to grow, it will give off lots of air, and that's what's going to create all the bubbles. So if we put it in too hot of water, it's going to kill it, and it's no point it being in there because it's not going to create all that lovely springy texture that we want. So the yeast goes into the water, and that's going to just hydrate it again. It's been dried, and we need to hydrate it. While that's hydrating, we're going to add a tablespoon of sugar and 10 grams of salt into the flour. And then we're going to mix the two together. So the yeast has dissolved in, we've given it a good stir, and we're just going to make a well in the middle of our flour and pour it in. We're then going to use the claw technique, and we're going to mix the two together. You want to go right to the edges. You don't want just a little clump of wet mixture in the middle. You want everything mixed in so it's all even. So you really need to make sure your hand is swirling around the whole bowl and have the other hand holding onto the bowl so it's safe. Now, if you've got your measurements right, it should go into a lovely tacky dough. It shouldn't be dry. We don't want dry bread, but we don't want it all gloopy. If it's gloopy, we need to add more flour, a handful of flour at a time, until it comes to this sort of texture. It's sticking to my hand, but it's coming off at the same time. It's tacky. And if it's dry, then you need to try and knead in a bit of liquid, but that's a lot harder. So now we've got it at this tacky stage, and the bowl's nicely cleaned out, we can knead it. And the kneading is using the gluten, like I said before. It's stretching it. So when the bacteria starts giving off that air, it's actually going to be caught. If you were to not stretch it, when the bacteria starts getting bigger and bigger air bubbles, it will break. And it will just make the dough flatten down again. So you really need to knead it. And we do this with the palm of our hand, just pushing it out. And if your dough is tacky, you shouldn't need any extra flour. We don't want extra flour, it's only going to dry it out. But really stretch it. You can pull it both ways, however you want. But the more you stretch it, the better it will become. So, once this has got to the correct stage, it should be nice and smooth. It shouldn't be all bitty like it was at the start. It should all have come together and be lovely. Still a little tacky, but almost a little drier. Now, if there was time, we'd put it in a glass bowl, and we'd add a little flour at the bottom to stop it sticking, and we'd let it prove for an hour. This would allow the bacteria to give off its gas, and for the gluten to catch those bubbles, giving a really light bread that's kind of doubled in size. At school we don't have time to do that, so we're just going to roll it out and let it prove for a little while, but if you try this at home, you can. And this is what it will look like. The bread's going to double to this size, which you can see there's a lot of air bubbles underneath. You can really see it's proved. We're just going to tip this out, and we're going to what's called knock it back. We don't want the air bubbles to be too big. If you look inside, you'll have some really big air bubbles, and that's not going to be very nice. It's going to make the bread quite hollow, and someone's going to get a bit with no bread in it. It's just going to have a big hole. So we just fold it over and knock a bit of that air out. Now we're ready to roll it out. At school, this is what we will do once we've kneaded it. At home, you can do this after your hour of resting. Now I'm going to use a special ingredient called semolina because I want a really crispy base. But if you roll it with semolina, you've got to do it first time. You can't then screw it back up and roll it out again because then it'll have lots of semolina in it. But what you can do is dust the table with flour. And again, you don't want to dust it with too much because it's just going to dry out the bread. So you just want a light dusting that's going to stop it from sticking. And we'll move it around just to make sure new flour goes underneath so that when you finish you can pick it up and you can put it on your tray nice and easily. So, put my semolina down. I'm going to put a fair amount of semolina. This doesn't dry it out, this gives it a nice crispy texture. It's what a lot of takeaway companies would use, and it's very cheap and it gives a great finish. So down that goes, and I've got my rolling pin, and I'm just going to try and roll it to a nice circle. Now if the top is sticky and it's sticking to the rolling pin, just take a little bit of flour and you can just stop it from sticking too much to the rolling pin. Okay, so you've rolled it out and it's loose. You've got to check it's loose so you can lift it up. And you'll have noticed all that gluten stretching and almost springing back like an elastic band. So now I'm going to show you how to do a stuffed crust. You don't have to do a stuffed crust, but if you want to, here's how. I'm going to do a tomato stuffed crust because I don't want too much cheese on the pizza, but you can do exactly the same as this with cheese or any ingredients you want. Stuffed crust is your decision. You're going to take your puree or your cheese and you're going to put a nice amount close to the edge. Not on the edge exactly, but close to the edge. Then you're going to take some water and with 2 fingers you're just going to dab it and make it a little wet around the inside. This will form a seal when you come to fold it over. Now you must make your pizza bigger, or at least your base bigger, when you're doing this, because as you fold it, you're going to about halve the size of the pizza, and you don't want it to be too small. So you need to make sure you've rolled it out extra thin. Then you just drag the edges, making them tacky again. Because you've rolled them out, you've dried it with the flour or the semolina, and we just want to get it sticky again. So just with your finger, push down and pull it out. And that's going to help stick. And then you start with one fold over, push it down, and then you carry on around. Now this is the hardest part, so take your time. You're going to need to place your pizza onto your tray before you put your fillings on. I'm going to use a round non-stick. If you're using a tray that isn't this sort of colour, this sort of non-stick, you need to make sure it's got grease-proof paper underneath or a silicone mat. So bring it close to the pizza. Make sure the pizza's unstuck. Always be checking that, especially if you've done stuffed crust, because you've added a little water to it. You've just got to move it onto the pizza. Maybe get 2 people and you can take 2 sides each. And once it's on there, you're ready to decorate. So now you've got your pizza all rolled out on your tray. You need to make sure you've cut up your ingredients using other YouTube links, or if you know what to do, go on and do that, and then you can build your pizza. I've chosen a simple one. I've chosen pepper, bacon and mozzarella cheese with tomato puree. So, tomato puree will go on first. We're just going to do 2 big spoonfuls, and I'm going to spread it on with the back of the spoon. Now, the reason you use the back of the spoon is because it's blunt. A knife could tear the bread, but the back of the spoon avoids that happening. So spread it on, and be generous. This is the only sauce the pizza has. Now, I'm using raw bacon, but there are many other ingredients you might want to cook first. It might be chicken or other meats, just to make sure when this is finished, they're fully cooked. Things like bacon, when it's thin, should cook in time, so you've got 10 minutes. So, first what we do is we put the mozzarella on, and I'm just going to tear this up. But if you've got something like cheddar cheese, you'd probably grate that. Some of you might want to put a bit extra cheese on top, just to protect certain delicate ingredients. But once your pizza is made, make sure your crust is fully pushed down, and it needs to go in the oven 10 minutes until everything is cooked. Once the time's up, we're going to take it out and enjoy.